So we're going to introduce today the concept of the universal human nation. So the universal human nation is an update on Sir Thomas More's fictional island from the book Utopia, which comes from 1516. He wrote it back in 1516. And it acts as a mental image that mobilizes action towards the future. So what does that mean? Well, nothing that any human being does happens without some kind of mental image. For example, if you get hungry, this triggers the consciousness to search for an object which can satisfy that hunger. And suddenly a mental image of, let's say, a pack of biscuits or some fruit in the kitchen appears in your mind's eye. So what's the mind's eye? Well, it's the mental space where images appear. And we're going to refer to this from now on as the space of representation. So it's this image in the space of representation that triggers a whole set of other mechanisms to happen, including, in this case, the body getting up from the couch and moving to the kitchen to find the food that we know is going to be there because it's come back into our memory. Yeah. So without a prior mental image, there is no movement, there is no action, not even to get out of bed in the morning. Without the ability to imagine future possibilities, without the ability to represent things in the space of representation, primitive men and women, and it was probably women from what we understand about ancient matriarchal societies, it would have been completely unable to imagine the benefits that fire could have brought to the tribe, and thus attempt to approach it, in the process overcoming every instinct to run away from it, and then to conserve it and to eventually be able to produce it. The universal human nation is an image of the world we would like to live in. And although we don't write about it or talk about it or mention it in every article that we write as nonviolent journalists, it is an image that acts in the consciousness of each and every one of us. It is mental images that aspire action. And one of the greatest people to play with mental images and transmit them was Martin Luther King. So what I'm going to want to show here is a little excerpt of one of his speeches.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrims tried. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last."
The master at transmitting images and creating hope, creating an image of a world that we could live in. Okay, I can barely watch that without getting emotional. I don't know how it affects other people. Into this topic for our first exercise, the reading for this week included a chapter from the book Letters to My Friends by CeeLo, and the letter that was chosen, letter number 5, contains a section which I'm going to read out here. It's the first section of the letter, and it says, "The most important issue, to know if one wants to live and in what condition. Today, millions of people struggle simply to subsist, not knowing whether tomorrow they will be able to surmount hunger, disease, and neglect. Their needs are so dire that whatever they undertake to escape their problems only further complicates their lives. And are they to do nothing then and remain in a state that is really one of postponed suicide? Are they to attempt desperate measures? What sort of activity, what risk, what prospect are they prepared to face? What are those who, for economic, societal, or simply personal reasons, find themselves in extreme conditions supposed to do? Always the most important question is to know if one wants to live and to decide in what conditions to do so." So for this first exercise, I'm going to put you into one group. I think there are 5 of you, and I want you to answer the questions that I've just proposed, and I'm going to put them here in the chat. And it's the idea for you to imagine what kind of world you want to live in. What would that look like? What's the universal human nation for you? What is the world without violence? Okay. What's your dream
Yeah, I mean, we all kind of said similar things. I think Snigdha really summed it up quite well there. I think for the first question, a lot of us kind of agreed that like we don't feel the need to have like extravagant lifestyles or to reach some kind of peak in order to be content in our lives. And then I can't remember if it was Snigdha maybe who pointed out that there's a difference between happiness and contentment. And you can live a good life quite contentedly without always feeling really happy or over the moon all the time, right? Yeah, and then in terms of society, yeah, like tolerance, and it's not so much a case of, you know, when you hear universal humanism, it can almost sound as if like some kind of like utopia where everybody's got the same ideas, but that's not really what it's about. It's more about everyone being tolerant of each other's ideas and treating each other in a human way, even if they don't agree with everything.
I agree. I know exactly what you're trying to say. I wouldn't use the word tolerant, because tolerant for me has just got such a negative connotation, but accepting, accepting of diversity. As a gay man, I hate it when people say they tolerate my lifestyle, for instance. Like, fuck you. It's my life. I'm going to do what I want. Good. Anyone else got any comments? Anything on that?
I think it's very interesting the distinction you made among between contentment and happiness. It's very interesting because many times in life you are not just happy, but you have a sense in your life, you move towards what your objectives are, and you feel contented and you feel the valid action you're putting over, and you go in the direction that gives meaning to your life without that extraordinary moment of happiness, you know? So yes, very interesting, the distinction.
Thank you, Pia. Anyone else got any comments? Okay.
I also remember that I put this just a random idea that like how universities and colleges have this buddy project or mentor-mentee sort of pairings that should be just done on a global scale, where when you're little, you're just randomly paired with someone in the world, completely of different culture, different background, different everything. But then you talk to them and you have to share your life with them and you grow up together. I think that is how you actually become accommodative and, you know, being accepting of other cultures, because you've just known that this is your life, this is their life, and both can exist simultaneously. You just have like a broader mind perspective, because I think most of us just like live in like a very isolated community of like 50 people, you know, and that just shapes your thinking. So it is important to break that bubble, and like if you have to force yourself to communicate with people whom you never thought you would ever talk to.
Absolutely. One of the best things that I ever did in my life was going and living in another country. For instance, it forces you to experience different cultures, and it's an incredible learning experience. Okay.
But would a universal human nation where there is justice, where there is equality, where there is no violence, no discrimination, would that be enough to produce happiness? Is an additional question. Or happiness is a condition that can be acquired, is a level of freedom, is a level of development that can be achieved through an internal personal development, but that requires as a base quite often to have all the other aspects, or everything that has to do with necessities resolved. So perhaps that distinction has a bit to do with the idea of a slight distinction between happiness and contentment.
I think that's really interesting, because I think that for human beings, a lot of, or at least for myself personally, a lot of people I know, a lot of happiness comes from solving problems. So like noticing something that's not quite right, but that I or someone else has the capacity to make a change to, and then seeing the transformation of that, like that's actually like one of the moments that brings me greatest happiness. So if there was nothing to solve, I do wonder if I would be less happy. If I would have less meaning, I suppose.
Yes.
If you have less problems, you mean, to resolve. Well, anyway, there are considerations and reflections.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to the next part. So, right, I'm going to give a presentation now about the universal human nation and some of the obstacles in its achievement. So let's go with this. Okay. So this is what Silo had to say about the universal human nation. He said, humanists are internationalists aspiring to a universal human nation. While understanding the world they live in as a single whole, humanists act in their immediate environments. Humanists seek not a uniform world, but a world of multiplicity, diverse in ethnicity, languages, and customs, diverse in local and regional autonomy, diverse in ideas and aspirations, diverse in beliefs, whether atheist or religious, and diverse in occupations and in creativity. Yeah, so this is the kind of world that we want. It's opposed to the current system and the current tendency, which is to make everything uniform, homogenize everything. Everything has to be the same, with dominant culture imposed on everyone else. And that's not really the kind of world that we aspire to, and certainly not what is our image of the universal human nation. So I'm going to present now 11 symptoms of a violent world, and all of these things are elements that we hope we can, we'll be able to evolve away from as we approach this universal human nation. The first problem is the concentration of wealth. And Oxfam back in 2020, and every year it comes out with a new report about how wealth is increasingly concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. From 2020, they reported that 2,153 billionaires have more wealth than 4.6 billion of the poorest people. This concentration of wealth creates the conditions for death, disease, ignorance, and violence in all its forms. And obviously, as we all know, just by watching the news, we have this system of incredible inequality. Countries which are languishing in poverty, which they have absolutely no need to do if we were able to redistribute wealth accordingly. The second one, global military spending. Again, as many of us know, this is from 2019, but the 2020 report from CIPRI showed that the barrier of $2 trillion had been breached, and countries around the world are spending that amount of money on their armed forces, their weapons, their conventional, their nuclear weapons if they have them, and clearly all of this money, other reports show that with a fraction of that money we could resolve hunger and drought, famine, disease. All of these things are perfectly capable. We just need to target our resources accordingly. Point 3, still on the military theme, the nuclear holocaust. The international physicians for the prevention of nuclear war have concluded that a limited nuclear war in which only 100 of the world's combined arsenal of 14,000 weapons to be exploded on urban centers could kill up to 2 billion people as a result of the explosions, and also as of the nuclear winter that would ensue from the projection of so much soot and dust into the atmosphere. Forced migration due to persecution, conflict, generalized violence, human rights violations stood at 68.5 million people in 2027. Yeah, obviously, as we know, thousands of people are dying in the Mediterranean, in the Sahara Desert, in Central America, in Asia, and many other places in their attempt to reach better conditions for life and security. Human rights, although we have undoubtedly advanced in human rights over the last 100 years, and they have been codified into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which have been incorporated into the legal systems in many different regions. But we are far from living in a world in which these rights are fully enjoyed. And those rights that were talked about back in 1948 have been obviously developed a lot in subsequent years. And now there's all kinds of human rights which relate to data and privacy and all these things, which we also would like to see universalized as time goes by. Clearly, the situation which women are living in vast parts of the world is just tremendous, you know, with women being murdered every day, facing discrimination, exclusion, economic repression. I mean, it's just, you know, this is just not the world that we aim for. The same happens to people who are consider themselves LGBTQ. Although in many places those people are able to get married and have a certain level of human rights, in many places they're not the same level of rights as their heterosexual counterparts. And still, in something, I don't know how many countries it is still possible that LGBT people it's a crime and they can be subjected to death or to time in prison. Children around the world face exploitation. According to this report by UNICEF, 1 in 3 children under 5 are not growing well due to malnutrition. And in many other places, children are a source of labor. Indigenous peoples are facing discrimination. Their lands have been taken from them. You know, the indigenous lands are the lands, for instance, where uranium is mined, where resources are taken without the least bit of concern for what will happen to the people in those territories. Yeah, so it's another area which needs serious looking at. And coming back to topics which are obviously in the news and are extremely pressing, problems of biodiversity. The amount of species that are threatened with extinction is around 1 million that we know of. Obviously, there are vast numbers of species that we still haven't been recorded by science. But you know, the way that human beings are exploiting the earth is creating this problem, which is only going to be bad for human beings. And finally, I mean, the big one that we all know about, especially anyone who has been in the UK in the last week, and I'm sure in many other places, the climate change is creating more and more extreme weather, which is obviously a threat to human life. Those are all the resources. I will circulate this presentation at the end of the workshop for anyone who wants to look more into that. Yeah, so these are some of the difficulties. Now, this is you know, the universal human nation that we would like to live in. You know, we have to resolve all of those things. What is the common theme to all of those for all of those problems? It's a question for anyone. What is the common theme which connects all of those things? Kat.
Money.
Money. The great evil of our society. A tool which was originally used for the exchange of goods and services has now been turned into a weapon to oppress and suppress billions and billions of human beings. So going back to us, so we're going to go into back into a group exercise, and what we would like you to do is plan some kind of media production, and we're just going to do the planning for it now, without necessarily even mentioning the universal human nation. As I said, you know, everything that we do in Presenza and in nonviolent journalism is really about advancing towards a universal human nation. But doesn't mean that we talk about it or write about it in every one of our articles. But it's, you know, we're trying to create these images in the heads of people of a future world that could be possible, and then providing the tools of how that could be possible and the demonstration effects which are happening all over the world every day, but that yet don't get that media attention that they need. Yeah, so we want you to plan a media production that, without necessarily even mentioning the universal human nation, could create in the reader or viewer or listener an image of a future world that is attractive, that could mobilize people to action, and that is connected to one feature or other of the universal human nation that inspires you personally. Maybe some of the top topics mentioned in the presentation could be a starting point.
Because it may be a feeling.
Absolutely.
When we define it too much, it may be attractive for some people at some particular moment, but history keeps moving forward. Yet the feelings have no time. And that is wonderful, because feeling can be communicated and people can implement the pictures.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going back to that, and that goes back to the topic that we've talked about previously, the register. What does it feel like? What does the image of the universal human nation, what does that generate? What kind of feeling, what kind of register does that transmit in me? And then if that is something so inspiring, how can we transmit that to other people? Yeah, and that's kind of a little bit where this task is going. Now off you go.
Okay, so we all had very different ideas, and some haven't even had stories, so we kind of decided that which one is going to present their own eventually. Mine was, so all the subjects that we talked about before the breakout room with regards to money and wealth, right? So I would go there and I would try to compare and even say how it can affect wealth and education. So I would go to one specific country and try to find two people with the same interests and disponibility, capability, everything, and the person with the money and one without. And just see how their path can be changed. And I don't know, let's assume they choose to do politics in their life. One can go to a private school and get an amazing job. They can even go to the government, and it can affect the country. And the other one could have some better ideas, but then it isn't able to do anything because it doesn't have the resources. And depending even on the country doesn't help in that way. So I'll try to go that way. I'll try to compare between countries. So one country to another one, maybe even within the same continents. And then to sum up, I would choose I was thinking of an African country or India. To do a very poor, very rich person, compare everything, and kind of, I don't know, help the reader to understand that one person's money can actually just have consequences on the entire country.
Thank you, Carolina. That's an excellent point. And for any of you who have seen the video that was an optional thing for a few weeks ago on universal basic income, which poses that question and says, look, if we gave everyone a basic income where their basic needs were met, how much potential could we unlock? How many Einsteins or Galileos or Marie Curies are there in the world who are stuck in impoverished situations and are not able to release their full potential because of the economic situation that they lived in? In my own personal case, back in, I went to university back in the late 1980s, and at that time, I got free university education. Well, the outcome of my life is completely different as a result of that possibility, which today students in the UK who are going through a university education, only the rich really get the chance to have that opportunity, because everyone else gets burdened with so much debt that they are then, committed. They have to commit themselves to, a lifestyle of, working and paying off debt. So I think it's a great topic. Thank you very much. Kat.
I was going to say, you're saying only the rich and the Scottish, because the Scottish government still paying for education, which is really good. Well, my idea was a kind of mini documentary about the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, because historically in Scotland, there used to be a large population in the Highlands and Islands, but the Highland clearances took place, which forced Scottish people off of their land. It was like a really horrible situation. Like all the houses were burned down, basically, so that the landlords and landladies could use the land for grazing sheep. So if you've ever wondered why there's so many sheep in Scotland, that's part of the reason why. But in recent years, especially this year, I think there was a new grant program that was introduced to encourage people to move to the Highlands and Islands in order to kind of work the land, but also so much of the culture and the heritage, it's not been lost exactly, but it's really been like, it's still like hanging on just, but it has definitely been dispersed, like that community and that culture, the language, and there's just so much about the culture, and but also to do with the, you know, living with the land and all that, that is not as prevalent as it used to be. But there's been recent encouragements to kind of increase the population there and actually make it habitable again. And yeah, I think that would be a really interesting thing to make a kind of mini documentary about, to kind of talk about how, you know, land was exploited, but now there's new kind of restoration projects happening to restore the culture.
Somehow connected to the topic of Indigenous people. I mean, although, you know, when we talk about Indigenous people, we're mostly talking about, you know, people, you know, in South America and other places who have, you know, on the verge of extinction in some cases. But, you know, it's, you know, the way that a dominant culture comes in, uniforms it, homogenizes it, and just, you know, and imposes an external culture on someone else. So I think that's it's very, very nicely connected to the topics that were in the presentation. Thank you. Bruna?
Okay, so I did not have a lot of ideas, but I kind of thought one related to climate change. You talked about the presentation about how there are like climate goals that countries want to achieve before a certain year. And yeah, I remember about like technology, how is thinks about the climate change problem, and some like enterprises like create carbon footprint calculators, or like maybe not applications but websites, and where people just like share all the data related to their lifestyle, and they get like their carbon footprint, and maybe like even recommendations to reduce it. And you're like become more conscious about your impact on the environment. And like maybe if like everyone started using it, like not only individuals but also organizations and businesses, it's like we could reduce everyone could reduce our carbon footprint and achieve those climate goals, and maybe like help biodiversity and, you know, greenhouse gas emissions, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I think it's a very important topic. I mean, I can't remember if it was in the article that I sent around in the reading, but obviously I talk about it there. Obviously, you know, our society, our system has got to think long term. We can't think about, you know, persuading people to vote for us in 5 years' time so that we remain in power. We've got to think that we're living on a planet which has got to hold on to life for until it explodes from whatever star is going to, you know, kill us in the future. But we're talking about billions of years in the future, hopefully. You know, we need to live on a planet which is sustainable, and we're not, I don't think any of us are living sustainably at the moment. You know, there's no what we need to do is make sure that we don't harm this presentation, this planet for future generations. So I think it's a great topic. Snigdha, I see that you're about to drop off. Did you want to say something before you go?
Yeah, I have another meeting and it has started a
Okay.
little early. I'll just briefly share what I was thinking of as my idea.
Yeah.
Which was I think I mentioned it in like one of earlier workshops as well, and I think now I can really pursue it. This idea, like I came to know recently about like the France ranks very high in the biodiversity list of the countries, but most of its biodiversity comes from other islands which were part of French colonies earlier on, and now they're part of France as a nation. But it is not, the diversity isn't coming from France, the mainland, the land which is part of Europe. And the moment you remove those other land masses, France will drop quite a few places in the list. So then that is again creating this image that you have such biodiversity or you are so environmentally conscious, when that is not the case. And then again, those people might be French people or French citizens, but that is not, those are not the people you are picturizing in your head when you're thinking about France as a nation or when you're thinking about France as a land. So then what does that kind of imaging and positioning do? So I was thinking of writing something on those lines, because I think it affects seriously on like a more global political level.
Thank you so much, Snigdha. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Have a good meeting.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Maisa?
Hi. So in my case, I realized that in Tunisia we have problems in most of the elements mentioned. I think in 10 of the 11 elements we have problems in each one of them. So I ended up talking about some of them, such as forced migration and how people illegally migrate to Italy to find better opportunities, but end up living in dire poverty even in Italy, even though they were trying to escape poverty in Tunisia and unemployment in Tunisia, but they end up suffering more in Italy. And also talked about the issue of climate change in Tunisia, especially right now. There are fire breakups because of the heat in some of the mountains in Tunisia. Even yesterday, when I was going home from Tunis to Monastir, where I live, I literally saw a mountain breaking into fire, and there were no planes that are trying to reduce the fire or anything. So maybe I would talk about that and link it to Tunisia's investment in climate change, and what have we done in the recent 10 years after the revolution in relation to climate change. Since sometimes we get help from Algeria, like what happened recently, but usually Tunisia does not have enough necessities and enough materials to make the fire stop, if I might say, because we don't have those places that drop fire, that drop water onto the forests or the mountains. We don't have any of that. So maybe that's a huge issue here that we need to invest in instead of focusing on other trivial matters with the current political situation. And another idea that I thought of was the influence of Uns Jaber on the unity of the Arab nation, because everyone literally from the Arab world was supporting her, and everyone celebrated when she came second in Wimbledon, and even when she came second in world rank in tennis. So she was even celebrated by all the people when she came here in Tunisia, and people were singing and chanting and doing so many celebrations for her. So maybe that was a symbolic thing. It was a huge achievement for her, but it was something very symbolic for us in Tunisia and in the Arab world, and it gives a positive image of Tunisia and of the Arab region to the entire world.
Excellent.
So,
I love the idea. Thank you very much. Okay, great. So, that's, we've come to the end of today's workshop. The assignment obviously is to turn whatever you've been working on in that planning session into some kind of media production. I will send around the lesson plan as soon as this has finished, so you've got all of the everything that I've spoken about today. And just take a few minutes to make some notes, what you've learned and how you plan to apply it in your journalism. And thank you so much for continuing to come to these workshops every week. It's very nice to see you week after week. And unless there are any other questions or comments, then we can finish the workshop there.